Slow down. Yeah, right there. Feel that silence, that uncomfortable little pause where something knows you just walked into the room. That's not fear. That's recognition. That's the moment they realized this wasn't luck, wasn't chaos, wasn't a fluke. This move was too clean, too precise, too quiet. And now the same mouths that used to laugh are whispering the same question in locked rooms and encrypted chats. Who trained you? You see, if you had been sloppy, they could have dismissed you. If you had been loud, they could have framed you. If you had been emotional, they could have baited you. But you weren't any of that. You moved like someone who learned the rules by surviving their consequences. You cut through the situation without leaving fingerprints, without raising your voice, without begging for validation. And that's what broke their pattern recognition, because amateurs leave noise, professionals leave confusion, legends leave absence. They're replaying it now, over and over, slowing it down, zooming in, trying to find the tell, the mentor, the blueprint, the secret hand that guided yours. And it's driving them insane because they can't find one. No guru, no institution, no shadowy benefactor. Just you, standing there like a contradiction they weren't prepared to solve. Calm but dangerous, kind but unreadable, disciplined but unpredictable, a saint with the posture of a psychopath, an angel who learned how demons think. That's the paradox they can't swallow. You don't move like someone who was protected. You move like someone who was tested, like someone who learned by bleeding quietly, like someone who paid tuition in pain, interest in betrayal, and graduated with honors in restraint. Every scar taught you timing. Every loss sharpened your patience. Every night you thought you were forgotten trained you to operate without applause. And now your silence hits harder than their speeches ever did. They're asking who trained you because they refuse to believe suffering can create this level of control. They want a name they can subpoena, a system they can infiltrate, a school they can discredit. Because the truth, that pressure forged you, is terrifying. The truth says anyone they corner, isolate, starve, or underestimate could come back like this. And that idea threatens their entire hierarchy. You learned when to speak by being ignored. You learned when to strike by being cornered. You learned when to disappear by being hunted. That's not mentorship. That's evolution. They keep expecting arrogance, rage, a victory lap. But you deny them all of it. You don't gloat. You don't explain. You don't even look back. You let the result speak, and then you walk away like it cost you nothing. That restraint, that's what tells them you're dangerous, because only someone who has mastered their own chaos can afford to be that calm. Only someone who has stared into the abyss long enough learns how to use it instead of falling in. They're terrified because your move didn't look rehearsed. It looked internalized, like instinct, like muscle memory, like something you've done 1,000 times in your head while everyone else was sleeping. And now, they're realizing the most unsettling possibility of all. You didn't need a trainer. You didn't need permission. You trained yourself in the dark, with no witnesses, no safety net, no applause. Just repetition, discipline, and the kind of pain that rewires a person. You became unpredictable not because you're random, but because you're free. You're not reacting anymore. You're choosing. You're not emotional anymore. You're intentional. You're not chasing approval anymore. You're operating from clarity, and clarity looks like sorcery to people who live off noise. So let them ask. Let them speculate. Let them invent stories about secret programs and hidden mentors. Let them convince themselves you're an anomaly instead of a warning. Because the truth is simpler. and far more dangerous. You are what happens when someone survives the worst parts of themselves and keeps going. You weren't trained by a person. You were trained by pressure. You were trained by loss. You were trained by the nights that didn't kill you, but stripped you down to something sharper. And now every move you make feels surgical, because you learned where it hurts by being cut there first. They're not asking who trained you because they're curious. They're asking because they're scared. Scared that they can't replicate you. Scared that they can't control you. Scared that if someone like you exists without a leash, without a master, without a script, then the system they rely on isn't as solid as they thought. You are the proof that chaos can produce order, that darkness can refine light, that pain can create precision. And that's why this move shattered them, not because it was loud, not because it was flashy, but because it was inevitable. And here's the part they're really choking on, the part they won't say out loud even to themselves. This wasn't your peak. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a gamble. This was a baseline, a casual execution of something you've already outgrown. And that realization, that's what's stealing their sleep. Because if this is what you do, without announcing it, without rehearsing it in public, without posturing, then what the hell are you capable of when you actually decide to apply pressure? They keep scanning your past, hoping to find chaos they can use against you, trauma they can trigger, patterns they can exploit. But all they find are dead ends and silence. Not because nothing happened, but because everything happened, and you metabolized it. You didn't rot in your pain. You processed it. You refined it. You turned it into something cold, elegant, and efficient. You didn't become numb. You became precise. That's why your unpredictability terrifies them. You don't lash out when provoked. You don't panic when threatened. You don't beg when cornered. You pause. You watch. You calculate. And then you move once, cleanly, like you've already seen the ending. Like the outcome was decided long before anyone else realized the game had started. They're used to controlling people through emotion, fear, ego, validation, hunger. But you slipped through because you already starved. You already bled. You already lost what they dangle as leverage. So when they tried to pull your strings, they felt nothing. Slack. No resistance, no reaction, just silence. And silence is the one thing they don't know how to fight. You're not reckless enough to self-destruct, not obedient enough to be owned, not loud enough to be predictable. You exist in the gap between saint and psychopath, the space where morality isn't performative, and violence doesn't need to be physical to be devastating. You don't break rules out of rebellion. You transcend them out of understanding. And that makes you impossible to classify. That's why they're asking who trained you. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting a flaw in their worldview. It would mean acknowledging that systems don't always produce excellence. Sometimes pressure does. Sometimes neglect does. Sometimes betrayal sharpens a person beyond anything structure ever could. You weren't shaped by comfort. You were shaped by contradiction. You learned empathy by being hurt. You learned control by almost losing it. You learned patience by waiting through hell with no guarantees. That's not weakness. That's a forge. And now every time you enter a situation, the temperature drops. Conversations slow down. Eyes track you without meaning to. People feel it before they understand it. This sense that you're not here to prove anything. You're here because you know something they don't, something they can't access. And knowledge, real knowledge, makes people nervous. They keep expecting a tell, a crack, a moment where the mask slips. But what they don't understand is this isn't a mask. This is integration, light and dark fused into something functional. You don't deny either side of yourself. You command both. And that balance, that's lethal in a world built on extremes. You're calm because you've already survived your own worst-case scenario. You're focused because distractions used to cost you everything. You're disciplined because chaos once ran your life and you refused to let it win. So when you moved, it didn't look emotional. It looked trained, but not trained by hands, trained by consequence. Let them keep asking. Let them keep theorizing. Let them invent myths about secret mentors and hidden factions. Because while they're busy chasing ghosts, you're already adapting again, quietly, patiently, evolving past the version of you they're still trying to understand. And that's the real threat. Not that you made one flawless move, but that you can make another, and another, and another. Without warning, without permission, without ever needing to explain yourself. Because the truth they're dancing around, the truth that scares them more than any enemy, is this. You weren't trained to follow a path. You were trained to create one. And that's where the panic really sets in, right there. Because paths can be blocked. Leaders can be removed. Systems can be infiltrated. But someone who creates paths, someone who walks where nothing existed before, that kind of presence doesn't respond to pressure. It renders pressure obsolete. They're realizing too late that you don't operate from instruction. You operate from awareness. You don't wait for permission because you already survived what happens when permission never comes. You don't look for approval because you learned early how dangerous applause can be. You move like someone who understands that the loudest room is usually the least informed, and the quietest figure is often holding the detonator. That's why your stillness unsettles them more than rage ever could. Rage is predictable. Ego is exploitable. Desperation is loud. But you don't leak intention. You don't advertise momentum. You don't telegraph growth. You let people underestimate you right up until the moment their assumptions collapse under their own weight. They keep asking who trained you because they're trying to figure out how to stop you. They want to reverse engineer the process, find the switch, cut the supply line. But there is no supply line. There is no instructor to intimidate, no doctrine to discredit, no playbook to steal. You are a closed system, self-correcting, self-fueling, self-directed. You learn discipline without authority. You learn strategy without safety. You learned restraint without reward. That combination shouldn't exist. And yet here you are. You're living proof that evolution doesn't ask permission, that pressure doesn't always crush. It sometimes selects. And you were selected, not because you were the strongest, but because you were the one who could adapt without losing yourself. You didn't become cruel. You became exact. You didn't become cold. You became intentional. You didn't lose your soul. You learned how to protect it behind steel. That's the part they don't understand. They think darkness corrupted you. They think pain twisted you. But pain didn't rot you. It educated you. It showed you how fragile people become when they rely on comfort. It taught you how systems fail under stress. It revealed where humans lied to themselves to survive. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. So now when you speak, people listen. Not because you're loud, but because your words land like conclusions. When you act, people hesitate. Not because they fear you, but because they sense you're already ahead. You don't rush because you know timing beats speed. You don't explain because mystery creates gravity. You don't threaten because outcomes do that for you. They keep looking for the moment you'll slip, the relapse, the emotional outburst, the flaw they can exploit. But they don't realize the flaw already happened. It happened years ago when life stripped you down and forced you to rebuild from nothing. And you did, slowly, quietly, correctly. You integrated the saint and the psychopath, the compassion and the calculation, the mercy and the resolve. That balance makes you immune to manipulation because you can empathize without surrendering, and you can cut ties without hatred. You don't need to destroy people to win. You simply outgrow them, and that terrifies them. Because growth is contagious. Because someone watching you realizes they don't need permission either. Because your existence proves that the system doesn't get the final say. Adaptation does. And once that idea spreads, control becomes fragile. So let them keep asking who trained you. Let them keep searching for a master behind the curtain. Every second they spend looking backward is a second you spend moving forward. Every theory they invent is a distraction from the truth standing right in front of them. You weren't trained by a person. You were trained by reality when it had no reason to be kind. And now reality listens when you move. This wasn't a clean move because it was calculated. It was clean because it was inevitable. Because you already paid the price. Because you already survived the lesson. Because you already became what pressure was trying to create. And the most dangerous part? You're still learning. And that last part, that you're still learning, is what pushes them from concern into dread. Because learning means motion. Learning means expansion. Learning means whatever box they're trying to fit you into is already obsolete. They can handle a finished product, a final form, a known quantity. They can study it, label it, contain it. But you're not finished. You're not even close. You're mid-evolution, and evolving entities don't follow rules written for static ones. They keep mistaking your composure for completion. They think because you're calm, you're done growing. Because you're controlled, you're settled. Because you're precise, you're predictable. That's their fatal misread. Calm isn't the end state. It's the launch pad. Control isn't stagnation, it's leverage. Precision isn't rigidity, it's freedom. You're calm because chaos no longer owns you. You're controlled because impulse no longer drives you. You're precise because waste disgusts you now. That's not a plateau, that's a foundation. They don't realize you're watching them the same way they're watching you, but with clarity instead of panic. You see how they move when threatened. You see how they rush to categorize instead of understand. You see how they cling to old frameworks because admitting something new would mean admitting they're vulnerable. And vulnerability terrifies people who built their identity on dominance. You don't hate them for it. Hate is loud. Hate is sloppy. Hate clouds judgment. You understand them. And understanding someone gives you an edge that rage never could. You know their strengths are habits. You know their weaknesses are pride. You know exactly how long it takes before fear turns into mistakes. That's why you don't rush the kill, metaphorical or otherwise. You let people overextend themselves. You let them talk too much. You let them reveal what they protect, what they fear losing, what they can't afford to admit. You learned patience when impatience cost you everything. And now, patience works for you like a silent weapon. They want to believe you were trained because training implies limits. Training implies doctrine. Training implies a ceiling. If someone taught you, then someone else can unteach you. If someone shaped you, then someone else can reshape you. But if you shaped yourself, if you emerged from pressure with agency intact, then there is no ceiling, only trajectory. You're not driven by proving people wrong anymore. That phase is over. You're driven by alignment, by moves that feel inevitable the moment they're made, by actions that don't require justification because they're internally coherent. You stopped asking, "How will this look?" and started asking, "Does this move the truth forward?" That shift, that's when power gets quiet. They're unsettled because you don't posture, you don't seek dominance, you don't flex. You let people underestimate you because you know underestimation is camouflage. You learned long ago that the most dangerous position isn't the throne. It's the shadow just outside the spotlight, where observation beats performance. You don't announce growth because growth doesn't need witnesses. You don't threaten because threats warn people. You don't chase because chasing puts you behind. You let outcomes speak, and outcomes don't argue. They keep replaying your move, hoping to find arrogance in it, some telltale sign of ego. But all they find is restraint, economy, respect for consequence. That's what unsettles them the most. Arrogant people make sloppy mistakes. You didn't. You respected the complexity of the situation enough to move surgically. That level of respect usually comes from someone who has broken things before and learned. You've been the villain in someone else's story just for refusing to stay small. You've been called cold for choosing clarity. You've been called dangerous for being honest with yourself. You've been misunderstood on purpose because understanding you would require others to confront their own stagnation, and instead of letting that harden you, you refined yourself. Instead of lashing out, you sharpened inward. Instead of proving them wrong loudly, you let time do it quietly. Now they're left with a question that has no comforting answer, not who trained you, but what happens next. Because they can feel it. This wasn't the move of someone reacting. This was the move of someone positioning, someone clearing space, someone setting conditions. And people who set conditions aren't responding to the game. They're rewriting it. You don't need to rush what's coming. You already know timing is everything. You already know silence can be louder than noise. You already know the most effective moves don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves after it's too late to stop them. So let them keep circling. Let them keep whispering. Let them keep trying to name the thing they're feeling so they can pretend they control it. You'll keep doing what you've always done. Observe, adapt, refine. Because you weren't trained to survive one moment. You were forged to keep evolving past every one of them. And that's the truth they can't escape. This wasn't your cleanest move. It was just the first one they noticed. Hush. Don't look at the noise. Look at the board. Feel it? That pressure behind your eyes. Like the room got smaller the moment you walked in. That's not anxiety. That's the world realizing you've been playing a game it didn't even know existed. They knew what you were doing in silence. That's the part that should make you smile. Because you didn't announce it. You didn't beg for witnesses. You didn't scream your plans into the void like the desperate do. You moved like a ghost with a purpose. Clean, quiet, surgical. And while everybody else was performing, you were positioning. While everybody else was chasing validation, you were building inevitability. While everybody else was loud, you were lethal. And they watched you. Not with applause, not with support. With that slow, sick dread that creeps into people who can't control what they're seeing. You ever notice how the loudest enemies get quiet right before something shifts? That's not them moving on. That's them calculating. That's them finally realizing you weren't stuck. You were loading. You weren't lost. You were mapping. You weren't broken. You were becoming the kind of problem they can't solve with gossip or sabotage or fake smiles. They knew. They always knew. They just hoped you would fold before the pressure did its magic. But you didn't fold. You learned to breathe under it. And that's why the board is moving now. Because there's a moment in every power story where the world stops pretending, where the masks slip, where the "oh, I didn't notice you" act collapses into frantic motion, where doors that stayed locked for years suddenly creak open like they were never locked at all, where people who never replied suddenly just wanted to check in, where the same mouths that dismissed you start using softer words, slower sentences, careful tones, because now they're speaking to something they don't fully understand. They can't call you weak anymore, so they call you dangerous. They can't call you delusional anymore, so they call you lucky. They can't call you a nobody anymore, so they call you a problem. But you and I both know the truth. You didn't get lucky. You got rebuilt. And that rebuild is ugly. It's not cute. It's not inspirational quotes and sunrise therapy. It's nights where your mind chewed through itself. It's mornings where you looked normal on the outside, while your insides sounded like war. It's the kind of pain that doesn't just teach a lesson. It rewires your spine. It teaches you the holy art of staying calm while the room burns, because you've been on fire before. That's your paradox, isn't it? You're the saint who didn't lose compassion, but you stopped being naive. You're the psychopath who could hurt people, but you choose restraint. You're the angel who still wants peace, but you learned how to carry a blade. You're the demon who could dominate, but you understand the cost of becoming empty. They can't categorize you, and that terrifies them more than any rumor ever could. Because society can handle monsters, society can handle victims, society can handle villains, society can handle heroes, but society cannot handle something that switches forms, something that smiles like kindness and thinks like war, something that can sit in silence and still bend the room. That's you. And let's talk about the silence. Because that's where your power lives now, not in attention, not in applause, not in proving yourself. In the silence. Silence is where you stopped explaining. Silence is where you stopped begging to be understood. Silence is where you stopped trying to make your pain make sense to people who only listen when it benefits them. Silence is where you learned the ultimate cheat code. You don't need permission to evolve. And while you were in that quiet evolution, they were watching, pretending they weren't. They were taking notes, pretending they weren't. They were feeling their control slip, pretending they weren't. You know what a chessboard is, right? It's a stage for strategy, a simple grid that turns tiny decisions into destiny. And the funny part is, most people only see the pieces. They stare at the queen. They fear the rook. They underestimate the pawn. But you started seeing the board itself. You started seeing patterns, timing, spacing, sacrifice, tempo, the psychological weight of a move that isn't about winning now. It's about making the opponent fear the next 10 moves. That's what you became, not a single threat, but a sequence. And sequences break people. A single attack can be defended. A single rumor can be survived. A single betrayal can be healed. But a sequence, predictable to you, invisible to them, turns their nervous system into static. Because they can't tell where it starts. They can't tell where it ends. They can't tell whether you're being kind because you're kind, or because you're placing the next trap with a smile. And that uncertainty, that's your crown. That's why the board is moving now. Because at some point, someone important looked at your quiet pattern and went, "Oh, not oh, that's cute, not oh, they're trying." The real oh, the oh that makes people sit up straight, the oh that makes groups form, the oh that makes phone calls happen behind closed doors, the oh that makes people suddenly consider you in decisions you were never supposed to be part of. That oh is the sound of control leaving their hands. And you didn't even raise your voice. That's the thing about unpredictability when it's refined. It doesn't look like chaos. It looks like calm. It looks like you don't react the way you're supposed to. It looks like you don't chase when they bait you. You don't panic when they threaten you. You don't beg when they ignore you. You just keep moving forward with that terrifying consistency. And they hate that because it denies them their favorite drug, your reaction. They wanted you loud so they could label you. They wanted you desperate so they could use you. They wanted you angry so they could discredit you. They wanted you emotional so they could steer you. But you got quiet. You got precise. You got colder in the right places and warmer in the right places. You stopped being a person they could play. You became a position they had to respect. Now look at what happens when you become a position. People don't support a position. They align with it. They counter it. They negotiate with it. They fear it. They try to copy it. They try to sabotage it. They whisper about it. That's why the board is moving now, because they're not reacting to your words. They're reacting to your presence. Your existence on the board forces everyone else to choose a side. And oh, you can feel it, can't you? That subtle shift in energy when you enter a room. That pause before someone speaks. That extra politeness. That sudden hostility from people who used to be neutral. That weird curiosity from people who used to overlook you. That's not random. That's strategy meeting your gravity. Because you're not just evolving, you're exposing them. Your growth is a mirror that insults their comfort. Your discipline is a spotlight on their excuses. Your calm is a warning that they can't bully you into shrinking. Your silence is a threat because it suggests you know things you're not saying. And let's be honest, you probably do know things you're not saying. That's another paradox they can't tolerate. You're not naive, but you're not cruel. You're not weak, but you're not loud. You're not chasing, but you're not hiding. You're not begging, but you're not bitter. So what are you? You're the kind of person who learned to turn pain into a private education. And education is offensive to people who survive by staying ignorant. See, most people treat pain like a punishment. You treated it like a laboratory. You let heartbreak teach you pattern recognition. You let betrayal teach you boundaries. You let humiliation teach you humility without submission. You let loneliness teach you self-command. You let failure teach you tempo. You let fear teach you breathing. That's why you can stand in the same storm that broke you and feel nothing but focus. That's why people swear you changed, like it's an insult. You did change. You became the version of you that doesn't die easily. And now the board is moving because they can't stop the piece you turned into. The piece that doesn't play by emotion. The piece that doesn't chase applause. The piece that doesn't fall for bait. The piece that can sacrifice what it loves for what it needs without turning into a hollow monster. That right there. That balance. That balance is what makes legends. Because anyone can be soft. Anyone can be hard. Anyone can be good. Anyone can be evil. But it takes a rare kind of soul to be both blade and bandage without confusing them. And that's what you are now. A blade with ethics, a storm with direction, a smile with teeth. So let's talk about the ones who knew in silence, the ones who watched you grow and did nothing, the ones who saw your potential and tried to starve it with neglect, the ones who sensed your trajectory and tried to distract you with drama, the ones who pretended you weren't changing because admitting it would mean admitting they didn't. They knew, but they didn't want you to know they knew. Because the moment you realize you're being observed, you stop playing for their approval, and you start playing for outcomes. And outcomes don't care about anyone's feelings. That's why the board is moving now, because they're not dealing with your emotions anymore. They're dealing with your outcomes, and outcomes make people panic. Outcomes make people scramble. Outcomes make people rearrange alliances, rewrite narratives, and suddenly always believed in you, like their memory is a costume. Watch how fast they switch scripts. Watch how the same person who mocked you starts speaking like they discovered you. Watch how the same person who ignored you now wants closure. Watch how the same person who used you now wants peace. Watch how the same person who tried to break you now wants friendship. It's not love, it's survival. You're a pressure system now. And when pressure systems move, everybody adjusts, whether they like it or not. Now here's the part you need to tattoo into your mind. Don't mistake movement for respect. Movement is often fear-wearing expensive perfume. Some people are moving toward you because they want to be near power. Some are moving away because they can't stand the mirror you've become. Some are moving sideways because they don't know what to do with you. Some are moving behind you because they want to follow without admitting it. Some are moving in front of you because they want to block you. And they're about to learn something funny about that. But you don't need to chase any of them. You just need to keep your tempo, keep your discipline, keep your focus, keep your silence sharp. Because the most dangerous thing you can do to people who rely on controlling you is stay consistent without being predictable. Consistency is your engine, unpredictability is your weapon. And that combination turns you into the kind of force that doesn't just win one game. It changes the rules of the room. You already did the hardest part, you know. You lived through the era where nothing moved. You lived through the era where nobody clapped. You lived through the era where you questioned yourself. You lived through the era where your own mind tried to betray you. You lived through the era where you had to build yourself with no audience. That era, that was the furnace. This era. This is the smoke people can finally see. And here's the funniest, darkest truth of all. The board isn't moving because you asked it to. It's moving because you became unavoidable. So don't get sentimental now. Don't suddenly crave validation like a starving thing. Don't start explaining yourself because the room feels different. Don't soften your strategy because people are being nice. Don't hand your power back just because they're finally paying attention. Attention is cheap. Position is priceless. Stay positioned. Stay quiet. Stay sharp. Because the moment you start loving their reaction more than you love your mission, you become a puppet again. And you are not a puppet. You're the player they underestimated. You're the piece they ignored. You're the pressure they can't pray away. They knew what you were doing in silence. They felt it. They watched it. They tried to deny it. And now the board is moving. Not because you're asking for a seat, because your next move is already forcing the room to stand up. Good. Then don't blink now, because this is the part where weak minds get distracted by the movement and forget why it's happening. See, when the board starts shifting, people assume it's because something new entered the game. A louder piece, a flashier move, a sudden declaration. They think power announces itself with noise, but real power announces itself with inevitability, and you've become inevitable. That's what they felt before they acted. That deep, uncomfortable certainty that no matter what they did next, they were already late. That the window where they could have shaped you, stalled you, misdirected you, or broken you, closed quietly while they were busy underestimating you. That's the cruelty of silence done right. Silence doesn't warn. Silence doesn't threaten. Silence just lets time do the killing. You let time do the killing. While they were laughing, you were learning. While they were talking, you were training. While they were performing morality, you were studying behavior. While they were obsessed with image, you were obsessed with leverage. And leverage doesn't come from force. It comes from understanding. You started understanding people the moment they hurt you. Not emotionally, strategically. You started noticing patterns. Who only shows up when they need something. Who disappears when things get hard. Who claps for winners but sabotages builders. Who pretends to be kind but panics when someone outgrows them. Pain sharpened your vision. That's why you can read rooms now without trying. That's why you can feel tension before words are spoken. That's why you don't rush to explain yourself. Because you already know who's listening and who's just waiting for ammo. They feel that too. They feel that you're no longer reacting to their surface behavior. You're responding to their intent. And intent is much harder to hide. That's why conversations around you feel heavier now, slower, more calculated. People choose their words like they're stepping on glass. They smile, but the smile arrives half a second late. Their eyes flicker when you speak, because they're not just hearing you. They're scanning for danger, and that terrifies them because you're not threatening anyone. You're just aware. Awareness is the most offensive weapon in a world built on denial. You see, most systems, social, emotional, professional, psychological, don't collapse because someone attacks them. They collapse when someone sees through them, when someone stops playing the role they were assigned, when someone refuses to react the way they're supposed to. You stopped being predictable, not in a chaotic way, in a composed way. You learned when to speak and when to let silence do the talking. You learned when to advance and when to wait. You learned when to forgive and when to remember. You learned that mercy without memory is stupidity. You learned that cruelty without control is weakness. So you built control. And control is quiet. That's the paradox that drives them insane. You're calmer now than you've ever been, yet more dangerous than you've ever been. You don't flare up. You don't spiral. You don't beg. You don't explain. You observe. You decide. You move. And that sequence, observe, decide, move, is what separates survivors from architects. You're not surviving anymore. You're designing outcomes. That's why the board is moving now, because architects don't argue. They don't plead. They don't chase approval. They change the layout. And once the layout changes, everyone else has to adapt, whether they like it or not. Notice how some people are suddenly nostalgic with you, talking about the old days, trying to anchor you to a version of yourself that was easier to handle, easier to dismiss, easier to control. That's not affection, that's containment. They're trying to shrink you back into a memory because they can't manage you in the present. Others will try a different tactic. They'll provoke you, push buttons they installed years ago, say things they know used to get a reaction, bring up wounds you worked hard to close. They're testing something. They're testing whether you're still programmable. And when you don't react the way you used to, when the buttons don't work anymore, when the insults land and slide off like rain on glass, that's when fear sets in. Because now they know the truth. You're not acting. You've actually changed. And change that isn't performative is unstoppable. Let me tell you something most people never realize until it's too late. Power doesn't fear strength. It fears autonomy. They're not scared that you're strong. They're scared that you don't need them. They're scared that you're no longer motivated by approval, validation, or belonging. They're scared that you can walk away without burning down or begging for scraps. A person who can walk away calmly is a nightmare to anyone who relies on leverage. And you can walk away. You've already practiced it in your mind, in your heart, in your habits. You detached long before you physically moved. You grieved the illusions privately, so you wouldn't bleed publicly. You killed versions of yourself quietly, so the world wouldn't know where to aim. That's why when things started shifting, you weren't shocked. You were prepared. You felt it coming before it arrived. That hum under reality, that sense that something was aligning, that eerie calm that shows up right before momentum kicks in. You didn't celebrate. You didn't panic. You adjusted your posture, because posture matters when power enters the room. Slouch, and people step on you. Overcompensate, and people test you. Stand neutral, grounded, unreactive, and people reveal themselves trying to figure you out. You've seen it already. The way people talk more when you say less. The way they expose intentions in their urgency. The way they volunteer information you didn't ask for. The way they suddenly want to be honest when they sense you're not desperate. Silence pulls truth out of liars, and you've mastered silence. That's why the board is moving. Not in chaos, but in correction. The game is trying to rebalance itself around you. Old hierarchies feel unstable. Old gatekeepers feel nervous. Old narratives feel thin. Because you represent an error in their math. You weren't supposed to make it this far without playing by the rules. You weren't supposed to heal without their permission. You weren't supposed to grow without their validation. You weren't supposed to win without becoming like them. But you did. And worse for them, you did it without losing your soul. That's the part they can't forgive. They could have handled it if you became bitter. They could have handled it if you became cruel. They could have handled it if you became loud, sloppy, arrogant. They could have handled it if you burned bridges dramatically. But you didn't. You became precise. You kept your empathy, but you put it on a leash. You kept your heart, but you armored it with boundaries. You kept your humor, but sharpened it into a blade. You kept your humanity, but removed your accessibility, and now you're walking proof that pain doesn't have to rot you. It can refine you. That makes people uncomfortable because it exposes a choice they didn't make. So let them move the board. Let them scramble. Let them whisper. Let them realign. You don't need to rush the endgame. Endgames favor patience. Endgames favor clarity. Endgames favor players who can see 5 moves ahead without falling in love with any single one. Remember this, you're not here to dominate everyone. You're here to outgrow the game they trapped you in. And once you outgrow a game, the board doesn't just move. It becomes irrelevant. Stay quiet, stay deliberate, stay impossible to read, because the most terrifying thing you can be to a world that underestimated you is calm, conscious, and still moving forward.